It's been about 6 weeks since that stressful day in the California desert when we tried to pack up and drive but ended up stuck for a couple extra days because the slide would not come in. For those of you that missed that part of the story, we have a video link here and also in the description below so you can see how we managed to remove the slide's complete mechanism, push the slide in and brace it in place with lumber in order to get back onto the highway. But for today, we're in British Columbia, Canada. We have the replacement parts, and it's time to finally get this much needed repair behind us. Our RV has the very common Lippert Schwintek slide-out mechanism. Many RV manufacturers choose to install this system. Look around any campground and you're probably going to see the familiar 2 horizontal aluminum rails. To summarize the system, there are 2 major components. The weight of the sliding room is supported at floor level by a number of these sturdy rollers. And then secondly, the force required to move that large mass is provided by this assembly known as the H-frame, and it is mounted in the wall. Our unit's failure happened deep within that H-frame. I could explain briefly how the simple H-frame drive system works. A slide-out room will have 2 of these assemblies, one at each end of the room. One motor sits at the top of each. The motor drives a vertical shaft, which turns 2 spur gears. There's a spur gear here on the lower horizontal rail and another spur gear up here at the top rail. These 2 rack and pinion drives push out the top and the bottom of the slide out at the same rate. And each spur gear sits in a bearing block along with 2 other small but important parts. I want to zoom in nice and close to one of the bearing blocks that take on the job of providing that forceful push which moves things in and out. Our failure happened here, with one of the 4 bearing blocks jamming firmly into the lower horizontal rail. It's easy to see just how cocked the block is. It should be parallel to the rail, of course, and it should slide along freely. In this case, I'm not able to move it at all. After gently tapping it back into alignment, I slid the block off the end of the rail. The small plastic shoe is damaged now. It must be replaced. We went to Travel Home RV in Abbotsford, BC, and they had a number of the shoes on hand. After chatting with the people at the parts counter, they decided to give us the 2 plastic shoes and a roll of butyl tape free of charge. This purchase should have cost us about $40 or so, and they just handed it over to us and told us to have a nice day. If you're ever in southern BC and need any parts or service done, Travel Home RV. Excellent customer service. Anyway, now we just have to put it all back together. The slide out must be pushed out in order to put the H-frame back in place. We can use one electric motor. It will bring out the slide's front half, and I'll be pushing the slide's rear end by hand. It's not all that difficult to move. We're going to leave the motor connected electrically, but not mounted in place, because when we push the slide in and out with the electrical, it'll be able to count the revolutions and think that both sides are running. Save us from faulting out the controller. I wish I would have thought of doing that back in the desert 6 weeks ago. At that time, we didn't keep this motor connected, and bringing the slide in was much more time consuming than necessary because we had to repeatedly reset the electronic control module. As the slide out is pushed out, its own weight starts to cause it to tilt. We have a support set up here to keep that from happening. The lower bearing block has a noticeable burr along this edge. Not serious enough to replace the block. We're just going to file that area back to being flat. Removing the old plastic shoe from the bearing block isn't difficult. Just open these metal retaining clips slightly. The new shoe then clips right into place. Only one of our shoes had sustained damage, but we decided to replace both of them since everything is already apart. On, sounds clipped, and I've got to look to make sure the 2 tabs are all coplanar. Nothing sticking up out of the normal surface, and there's not. It's all good. I want to get these 2 horizontal rails nice and clean. They don't need to be replaced. I don't see any damage on them.
The bearing blocks slide nicely along the rails now. We've applied lubrication along this channel where the shoe runs. We start by returning these 2 rails into position, screwing them onto the outside of the slide's wall. We're putting a small dab of silicone at each screw location to keep the rain out. Remember too that our bearing blocks are on the rails. They have to be installed before screwing the rails in place.
Next step is to put the drive shaft and the gears in. Got to identify which end of this drive shaft is top and bottom. You can actually tell just visually, but we'll verify it too. The top has these deformed crimped marks, and they prevent, I'll try and put the gear on. There goes the gear, will go over at the bottom, and when the gear gets to the crimped mark on top, it will not go off. That's how you know that that's the top, because the gear prevents this great big drive shaft from falling down during operation. So I'll take this gear off now and we'll do the assembly.
The spur gears now slip into the bearing blocks. Each gear has this letter S stamped onto it. We're marking the S tooth with ink in order to identify its location later. Note that the bottom of the spur gear has this collar protruding and the top of the gear is flat. So we put the top gear into place and we insert the drive shaft from the top. Our choice of where the bearing block will be during this alignment stage is not important. What is important is that the top and bottom bearing blocks are exactly the same distance from this wall surface.
3 3/8, we're good.
Well, that's nice. If you want to smile, this would be a fine time to do it.
And that the blue ink is facing directly at us on each of the spur gears. It's time now to lubricate these upper and lower gibs. And also inside the bearing blocks where the spur gears sit. There's a coupling that connects the motor to the top of the drive shaft. It needs to be lubricated now and inserted from the top onto the drive shaft. Before getting this vertical support column into place, it's time to clean off the old sealant and install a new strip of butyl tape. Snapping the large vertical covers gibs onto the bearing blocks, we have the complete assembly now. It rolled along easily along the rails and up against the RV's outer wall. We're getting close now. Time to lock this support column firmly to the wall. In our case, we have a number of screws holding it from the outside and two steel brackets that hold it in place from the inside. This column isn't just decorative, it performs two functions. It pushes the slide room in or out, and it keeps the room vertical, not allowing it to tilt at all. We'll have a look at the seal inside the RV, verifying that it hasn't been damaged at all. And we slowly install the screws to draw that column tightly against the RV's wall. Back inside, these two steel brackets finish the job of mounting the column.
This is our last chance to lubricate the coupling that connects motor to drive shaft. The motor can now go into place. It's a tight fit, tricky to get it in there, and the location of wire harness is important. We don't want the wires to rub against the frame and cause a short circuit later. The motor is held in place by one set screw. This screw is installed from the outside and keeps the motor from lifting up out of position. There are seals to put back in place, both on the inside and on the outside. The wires can be run through this indoor bulb seal, keeping them safe and out of sight, and the indoor bulb seal slides right onto the seal's base plate, and all of it is held into place with two-way tape. That sums up the job. Now comes the easy part. We just have to synchronize the two motors. This is a process of teaching the controller where each end of the slide is. We do this by putting the slide out until both ends are fully out. The controller sees this happen when each motor amps out and stops moving. The controller checks for the two motors being synchronized each and every time that you put the slide in or out. So it's a good practice not to stop the slide's motion partway through its travel. It's best to hold the button for 3 seconds after the slide is done moving, whether it's being brought in or being brought out. With the two of us living full-time in this 22-foot trailer, it's been a little crowded for the past 6 weeks with the slide being unable to slide out. I sure love having it back to normal. I see nothing wrong.
Look at all the space. Wow.
Wow is right.
We are so glad to have this job behind us and have our slide working again. Until next time, we look forward to seeing you on the road.
Check out some of our other videos and subscribe to our channel.
New content will be posted weekly.